Everyone, thank you for those of you who are able to join me while we do the live stream of our day texts. And as you know, we work through the biblical books and letters as well as other related texts pretty much every weekday and Saturday, unless, like yesterday, nothing is scheduled. But usually I'll put up a notice the day before each day text so that you have some basis to go by. But just always be sure to click the notifications button so that you can be notified as quickly as possible. And then if you don't see a scheduled live show for, say, like a morning like today, which is what happened yesterday, then you know I'm probably taking that day off or that morning off. And that, if it happens, is usually because I'm very busy with work, or I just came off the part 3 of the Michael and Jesus as the Biblical Archangel show. And I just kind of wanted to let that, sink in a little. Sometimes it's difficult, I know, for some of you to keep up with all the videos. And that's fine. Just do your best. Watch them as you have time. Or if you see a subject that we do a special video on, then maybe you jump to that one. But either way, I know it may be hard at times to stay current. So still, I think it's a good way for us to progressively work through this material and also meet together so that we can talk about it and continue to grow in our Christian faith. So let's get right to it. We're in the book of Revelation. We're in chapter 3. We've read several texts that introduce Jesus in a way very similar to how one of the two spirit beings is described in Daniel 10. Whom I believe is Michael the Archangel in that specific description, which is why it has such a profound effect on Daniel, just like the effect Jesus had on John. And in both cases, of course, they show tremendous respect and homage for the positions that they have under God. Remember, in our view, Jesus is the imprint of God's being. That's not just our view because we came up with it. It's what Hebrews 1:3 teaches, and it's consistent with everything else. And that shows that they would obviously be very similar to God in Daniel, described as the Ancient of Days, or elsewhere, like in the book of Revelation. So there would be a similarity between them, depending on the nature in which the vision is given to us, right? We don't really know the full extent of what these descriptions actually represent. We're just being told by analogy with things like burning copper, lightning, sun, what these people are seeing. And through those descriptions, we get a sense of what they saw. So I don't think, certainly not I or anyone that's involved with what I'm doing, is using descriptions to make an absolute point about something. They just show a consistency that is otherwise that is important to note if we're trying to identify individuals, right? I mean, the texts are the ones that present to us these descriptions, whether they're in Daniel or in Revelation, like we're going to read in a moment. And some of them are more analogous to things than others because they represent a metaphysical level of existence. And so physical things are used to try and convey what's really going on. But there's a whole lot of information on these texts in Revelation and in Daniel, and about Jesus and Michael the Archangel in my part 3. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. But I wanted to point that out since we're coming off of that discussion. We're back in the book of Revelation, very similar to Daniel in many respects. We've got these spiritual beings. Like I said in the opening of Revelation, what we considered about Jesus as the first and the last, the one who died and became alive, the way he's described is pretty much exactly like the description we're given of the one in Daniel 10. So it's not like these descriptions are everywhere. They're just for a few individuals whom we believe, if Jesus is Michael, would exactly or be very close to, right? Because an imprint impresses what the thing imprinting it looks like, but it's in another material, its own material. And so it would have its own color and certain things in ways that wouldn't necessarily have to be exactly the same as the imprinting device in terms of the analogy that Hebrews 1 gives us. But we know it would have to at least be consistent with the primary purpose behind imprinting, right? To bring something that looks like something else into existence somewhere else. Pretty simple. But we know there's more to it in terms of things we don't know because we don't experience them the way we do physical things. So we're going to have a similar combination with what we read in Revelation. In fact, it's Jesus talking to us in his heavenly glorified form. Ultimate glory, the highest level. He's been given the name above every name. He has been raised a life-giving spirit. And he has the 7 stars. He's the one using his angels. Just like Michael used his angels, or does later in Revelation 12, to fight the devil. And like he used Gabriel. Remember, Gabriel in the visions of Daniel had to look to Michael and ask him, the other spiritual being that was there. It has to be Michael. I kind of, in discussing it, we leave it open as we discuss it. But remember, as we got to 10, Daniel 10, he said that Michael's the one who came to help him. And that no one was holding fast with him except Michael. That's why Michael's there with him during this vision. And we believe that Michael was Jesus in his pre-human form. At least I do. It's not a requirement for Christian witnesses of John, but many do. And he's doing the same thing here with John. So let's see what he has to say. We read Daniel, I should say, a lot of it. And so I'm just using that as a parallel because we're coming off of that discussion where we read several texts in Daniel that are similar in terms of spirit beings talking to humans, conveying messages. So let's take a look and see what he says. He's writing to the Christians gathered in Sardis. We've talked about Ephesian Christians, Smyrnian Christians, Thyatiran Christians, Sardinian Christians. Let's see what he has to say to them. So chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. I'm going to read from the New World Translation. Or rather, I'm sorry, I did that with Daniel. But I don't have to with this text, the day text, because the day text we use my translations. So I'm reading from the Great Message Translation, but you're free to use whatever translation you want, including the New World Translation. And if there's any issues or controversies that we have to discuss, we will. But I don't think there will be any in these texts. So let's take a look. Here's how I would translate it, and did. To the messenger of the Christians gathered in Sardis, you must write, the one controlling the 7 spirits of God and the 7 bright lights says these things. Okay, remember what I said. This is in the preceding material, this is Jesus, the one speaking to the angels of the congregation, who then convey it through John to the congregations. He is in his full glory. I mean, he, in chapter 1, started talking to John and proclaimed himself as the one who became dead and who came alive, according to Codex Alexandrinus, the firstborn and the last, ha eskatos, not ego metatauta like Isaiah 44:6, totally different. And Isaiah 44:6, it does not use the article before protos for Jehovah. So there's no connection really there. And there's no connection with what he says in terms of dying and coming to life, which he says again in 2:8. But my point is that even in Trinitarians' view, right, because they view him as saying, I am the first and the last, in the same way as Isaiah 44 or Revelation 22, which we'll get to later, which is different in Codex A, as I pointed out before, in my second part on the Alpha and the Omega texts. But the fact is that in our view, this is Jesus, very similar, although elevated in terms of authority. Even the War Scroll says in column 17, as I read in part 3, that Michael would be exalted above all the gods and given authority that would be everlasting. So the fact that it doesn't say that his appearance would change, though, because he's already the imprint of God's being. And that's why there's a consistency with Daniel and Revelation, whether he's talking to Daniel or John. But he is here in his post-resurrection full glory. In Trinitarian's view, he's proclaimed himself essentially the God of Isaiah. But let's carry that with us, because you're going to see that does not connect with what he says in these texts. And it connects a lot better with our view of Jesus and Michael as it comes and is described in Daniel and other texts, including non-biblical but related texts like the War Scroll. So let's see, how does this exalted spirit being, whether it's the one in Daniel or the God of Isaiah, speak? I have come to know your works, verse 1, the last part of verse 1. I have come to know your works. Remember, he's been checking all the Christians out. Did the same thing with all the others. You have a name that is life, but you are dead. You know, we could use that in a modern sense today, not with any specific individual. But there are a lot of people, as I say, right? Why do we use Christian witnesses of Jah? Because there are a lot of people who use a name as if it's life. Excuse me. A little hair right there. But they're dead in terms of their works. They don't do anything but argue and fight. We have all kinds of people like that around us, right? I mean, I could do a show, and as I say in the very show, they'll question the very things I'm saying in that show after the video, which they did, in ways that made no sense. And are a distraction in ways that show they're dead, really, right? I mean, it's unfortunate, and anyone can come alive, and I'm not here to proclaim eternal life or death. But a lot of people have a name that they're alive, but their works show they're dead. And faith without works is dead. So, and most of them don't make that connection either. They discount works to the point where you can't even talk about them without them getting paranoid about whether or not you're trying to earn your salvation. So they've made everything ridiculous, right? An argument over everything. And so they call themselves Christian, and yet all they do is argue about the Christ with other Christians. Now, maybe there are times when people, like in the first century, they're teaching obviously false things. But, you know, that didn't mean they kept doing it, right? We have a few times where they argue with certain people or describe them as enemies of the faith. That's not their whole message. Now, if you took all the writings of the apologetic people today, you took pretty much all their writings and you added them up, what would the majority of their content be? I mean, it'd be like 90 to 95% argument with other Christians or not, or just argument, period, right? That's not what you have in these texts or in Jesus' life. So if you see someone like that, that's why I say all the time, try to avoid places that are just going to pull you in and trap you in a way that seems like life, but that just is death. And you don't do anything but argue and fight with people who really don't believe, because otherwise they wouldn't be arguing and fighting with you about belief. They'd be too busy believing and helping others believe, like young children who haven't been corrupted in ways where they need people like you and me. They need even people like them with a name that's life and they're dead. They won't do anything. They can't stop arguing. How are they going to help young ones? How are they going to help the poor? They're too busy arguing. And once they uncork that bottle, they have to stay after it, because otherwise they might be viewed as not winning, right? I mean, so it's a never-ending contest that's vanity. It's chasing the wind. It's holding oil in your hand. You can't do it. Not if you're going to do anything else. And so that's what happens to them. They don't do anything else, or if they do, they're constantly still bringing that poisonous spirit to you while you're trying to help people in need who are genuinely confused, who may be trapped in certain groups but don't have other ways to believe yet. We could help them if we stopped arguing. Their name is life, but they're dead. Verse 2, you must come alive. You must fix what is left, which is about to be destroyed. These things are going to go on forever. He's not going to tolerate either the world or his own people. When has he done that? When has Jah done that? Why would he do that? Why would he tolerate what's wrong? He tolerates us who do what's wrong because of the reason we do what's wrong. But if we don't come alive and do more of what's right, then we're going to be destroyed. Why? Because I've not found your works have been finished, as my God watches. This is not the God of Isaiah talking. This is Michael the archangel, or the Son of God, who is with God and Michael as they're fulfilling his will. But we know he's the archangel because he has the voice of the archangel in 1 Thessalonians 4:16. It's not an argument. It's teaching. The only question is he another archangel or is he Michael? Okay? The fact is, he's not the God of Isaiah. This God is. His God is. The God he's referring to is watching us all, and who he's looking to determine if he should give us life or death, just like the angel of Jehovah. Didn't tolerate the Israelites when they did things that were in violation of Jah's laws during a time that was especially important while he was purifying his people and bringing them out of Egypt with all those false teachings and people who were mixed in with them, and giving them new laws, helping them to form a nation so that he could bring forth his son and save humanity and restore the earth to his footstool. Whereas the devil's made it a joke, right? He's turning people in the opposite, and everyone looks stupid who does it. So there's nothing that he's doing in opposition to Jah that's right. He's either doing what Jah would do, and that's the only time he'd be right? Because Jah doesn't do what's wrong. He made everything. He knows what's right and wrong. So it's not like a problem for him to decide. It's just a question of whether or not other people, whether it's me, you, Satan, or his son, believe he's right. The same with Adam and Eve, right? They had no reason not to believe him and every reason to believe him. They just didn't believe him. And they desired something that someone who was trying to get his own way offered them. Happens all the time. So that's the same thing with these people who have a name they're alive, but they're dead. We get drawn to them because they say Christian, they're bored, say apologetics, all these things, these texts. And what do? They just keep us in this death cycle of fighting and, oh man, terrible. But they like it because of the vanity, you see. So to them, there's a satisfaction there. I'm not denying that. My point is, we have to come alive. We've got to fix what's left. They're done. Okay, the ones who are committed to these boards and apologetic nuts and who are fighting all the time or most of the time, they're done. They already know what to do. You can't help them. Now, they can come alive, but if you fall into the pit with them and don't show them you're not going to sink down and you're going to stand up and go forward, they're going to feel like it's okay to be in the pit because you're there with them. Misery loves company. So don't give these people a reason. Don't give them the vanity. Give them nothing. And then they'll maybe come alive. Because the God of this one, the first and the last who became dead, his God is watching. The God who commanded Michael the archangel, who separated the nations according to the boundaries of the children of Adam and according to the number of the sons of God. That's not just some post-Christian text. That's the Dead Sea Scroll pre-Christian text and consistent with later Greek texts. Just in case anyone's wondering or had a question about an unrelated text like they did before when I did Michael Part 3. And it's a text that in no way compares and doesn't even deal with an issue that I'm raising. It's just a way to get out of the text. And that's often what people do, so don't forget. Verse 3, therefore you must think back. What did I just say? You must not forget. Don't forget. You must think back. How you received and how you heard. Was it because of one of these nut jobs? Was it because of one of these Trinitarians who are so obsessed with you believing what is only articulated in creeds and councils hundreds of years after the texts? They're so obsessed with that. Are they the ones who taught you these things? Is that how you heard? Maybe there was some involvement because they were so active in ways where other people were talking to you and they were there in your beginning of your faith. I'm not talking about that. What did you hear that made you believe? Was it what they're saying? I doubt it. It was probably what the text said, right? Even when I was going to Watchtower meetings, it wasn't what they were saying. I started reading while I was there because it was, when I was young, boring. It became interesting, and there are a lot of good speakers. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it was when I was younger and when I didn't really want to hear them that I heard the text anyway. And then I started listening more and more and more, and here we are today. So we don't want to forget that, right? We believe because of these texts, right? If we joined the Watchtower, for example, we didn't join because of the things that are bad about them, right? The prophecy issues, the chronology, the blood. We'll talk about that Sunday, Zhuzhen. We joined them probably because of the divine name, the brotherhood, things that we could see that we also believed from the text, and that they represented in a way that was consistent enough for us to say, okay, that's next. I'm going to do that. And then we got in, we started doing all this stuff. There's still good there, and then now there's more stuff. Now we have to go back to the text. You got to think back. That's how you get through it and recover your faith. The rest of verse 3. You must be on constant alert, and you had better listen. You must change your beliefs, like he said before to the Thyatirians, I believe. If you do not listen, then you might want to stay awake. As I will come the way a thief enters, and you will not likely know at what hour I will come upon you. Right? He probably didn't even know, right? Because only the Father knew. So how would anyone who he's visiting know? So his point here is kind of conversation. It's like, look, if you're not going to listen to me, if you're going to continue doing these things with my Sardinian Christian followers, and you're not going to listen, and you're going to be dead in your activity, verse 1, then you might want to stay awake, because at the time I'm given, I'm coming. And then what? Right? Then what? We know what. We saw what happened in Daniel, right? You want to know what happens when he comes? Read Daniel 10. Read Daniel 10 and you'll see what happens when that one comes. And Daniel was a favorable man. What do you think is going to happen when he comes to them? Verse 4. However, you do have a few names in Sardis who have not stained their clothes. These obviously people stain their clothes, so we're a little bit of figurative here. It's talking about a stain, and it's more permanent than dirt, right? Something that we just can more easily clean. But if you stain something in a way, you're doing it more frequently, or to an extent where it's now embedded in your figurative clothes. But even the ones who stained, right? He was just talking to those, and he said, you've got to come alive. So you can be stained, but you can come alive. We all get stained, if not all of us, and we have to come alive. But there were a few who at this time didn't stain their clothes. They were doing their utmost. And we know from the records that many of them were killed. But they finished, right? They prevailed. They got the job done. And that's what's going to happen when they won. See, it's not a question of what's happened. They're done. They won. They're not done in the sense the apologetic nuts are. There's no value there. They finished their course. So they deserve it. He even says in verse 4, they deserve it. Let's try to be as close to that as possible, right? We don't want to think of it in terms of our deserving it. If he tells us we deserve it, okay, fine. But we shouldn't think about that. I deserve this life from you. That wouldn't be right. All right, so verse 5, the one who prevails. He's been saying this over and over and over again. Like this will be dressed in white, and I will not remove that person's name from the book of life. Okay, so he's basically saying right here, what? If you don't prevail, I will remove your name from the book of life. There's no other way to read this. The one who prevails like this will be dressed in white, and I will not do this. So then that must mean if you don't prevail, that it is going to be removed. Otherwise, there'd be no comparative difference. You see? If there was no actual removal of the name, then prevailing wouldn't make any difference. And he wouldn't even need to mention it as a threat if it made no difference, right? Obviously, it's mentioned because it makes all the difference. You have to prevail. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to keep going. And even if we stained our clothing, we must come alive. Fix it. Fix the problem. Verse 2, fix what is left. His God is watching. We know that. Last part of verse 5, I will also openly proclaim that person's name as my Father, his God, verse 2, watches and as his angels watch. That's something to look forward to. That's like, it's hard to envision now in the way that it would motivate us, like if you were being invited to, say, the highest level of human acknowledgement publicly. Like even, whatever is the case. So whatever you would compare, you would put on the level of just as many people of importance on the planet calling out your name and saying, good job. Good job, Betsy. Good job, Paul. If humans doing that would make you feel that good, what about when the Son of God calls your name? And the Father is watching, Jehovah, and his angels watch. Now that is going to be enough motivation for you to praise Jah for the rest of your existence, probably, right? Not only because they're acknowledging you in an approved way, but because you're with them. It's not about us ultimately, although we care, we want to live, but we care about them. They gave us life. They gave life to the people we love and would give our life for. So if we would give our life for others, like our family or people we love, then we know we care about more. Well, they matter the most because they gave life to all of us, the whole host. That's why verse 6 says the one possessing an ear must listen to what the Spirit says to the gathered Christians. So I'd encourage you to gather together, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 or however many of you can do so. You don't have to do it as often as maybe other groups, at least not until you can do so. But I would encourage you to do it more than you do it with those who aren't gathering together so they can have clean clothes and so that they can help you to praise Jah and not be confused. To just read the text, and then read what's next in the text and accept the text. And if there's a problem, look up the text. But this is what you need. You must remember what you heard. Think back, verse 3. And then you'll know. You'll be on constant alert. You'll remember what it was that brought you here at the first. So I thank you all for joining me today. I'm glad to be back in these day texts. I'll be doing some work later today. It's gotten a little bit busy, but I'll be back tomorrow for another reading in Revelation chapter 3. Until then, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and may God bless you in Jesus' name.